Hey everybody, hope you're doing great today. This is Paul from Aquariums and Gardens, and in today's video, I'm going to talk about aquarium heater safety tips. Now, when it comes to most of our fish, we are keeping tropical fish, and in most cases, we need to warm our tanks up in order to, give them the environment that's most beneficial for them. A lot of our fish are coming from tropical areas, so the regular temperatures vary from low 70s to low 80s or high 70s. And so in order to give them the best health and to give them the best chance to thrive, we need to heat up our tanks. If you live in a warmer area where you don't have much temperature fluctuations and you can keep your tank warm, through your surrounding environment, that's great. But in most cases, like myself here, I'm in Southwest Ohio. Today it's outside, it's about 30 degrees. So even indoors too, we set our temperature inside to about 68 degrees, 70 degrees, depending on the, who's home, time of day. So that's obviously not enough to warm up the tanks, and it's not going to be great for the fish. So we use water heaters. And with those water heaters, there are certain safety precautions you need to take, not only for yourself, but for your fish as well. You don't want to overheat your fish. You don't want to cook them. We've seen a lot of situations where the heater gets stuck on, and then it ends up just overheating the tank and all your fish get killed. On the opposite end, if your heater fails, it's not as drastic, because your water temperature is not going to drop that fast. Your indoors are generally heated, so you're definitely gonna lose temperature, you lose heat, and it's going to stress your fish out, but it's not going to be as bad as, say, going the other way where it gets too hot, ends up boiling that water, and then just killing the fish. That's a situation none of us wants. So with my own tanks, I use the in-tank heaters. In some cases, people have enough fish tanks in a certain room. They rather than heating individual tanks, they'll heat the entire room together. So they'll boost the temperature up to 75, 70 degrees, whatever. That room is enclosed, so it's easy to heat. That as well warms up the tanks, and you don't need to use individual heaters. So that's the case. We're in this case here, this is my display tank. I've only got one tank here out. I'm not going to heat this room up to 70, in this case 77 degrees. I'm going to keep it, I've got an in-tank heater there that keeps the tank warm, and I don't have to worry about the surrounding temperature. So the reason I wanted to do this video is I had a couple of incidents with water heaters recently, with a tank. When I first restarted my tank, I've been out of the hobby for a while, and then during the COVID time, I was like, hey, let me get back into this hobby. I always enjoyed it in the past, so I wanted to do it again. So I had a heater in storage, basically in our basement somewhere, that was never used. I purchased it for whatever reason, thought I was going to use it. It was basically sized for a 10-gallon tank. It was never used. It was looked good, so I tested it out. Obviously no live fish there, nothing live in there. Tested it out in a bucket with water. It heated up fine, worked fine. Okay, let's try it. At that point in time, I was just starting to cycle that tank, so there's nothing alive in there, excluding the bacteria, of course. It ended up working, so I ended up putting it in what became then a quarantine tank. Basically, before I got any fish in the main tank, I wanted to quarantine them down there, make sure there was no sickness, no illness, and it worked great. It was heating up the tank fine. So one time in looking at the heater, observing the tank, I noticed there was condensation inside the heater. When the heater heated up, you could actually see condensation form around the light that shows it's on. And then, as that heater turned off because the temperature was reached, the condensation would gather towards the bottom of the heater. You really couldn't see the condensation at the bottom of the heater, inside the tank, but once I pulled it out, you could actually see the water in there. So that led me to know that the heater was leaking. Water was getting inside the heater, which is not a good thing. Water and electricity don't mix. If water can get inside, and if enough water gets inside, that electricity can get outside, and shock a fish. It can hurt you if you're sticking your hand in the tank, and it could also hurt your fish. It could kill your fish. So once I saw that condensation, I checked the tank. The fish were fine. There was fortunately, there was no electricity coming out of the heater. Getting into the water of the tank. That would have been bad for the fish. So I immediately, went to a local pet store, got a brand new heater, and popped that in there, threw the other one away. So periodically, just check your heaters out. Just visually observe them. Do you see any condensation? Those heaters that are transparent, they've got like a clear glass tube around it. Check it out. Do you see any condensation inside? Look at the lights. If it's clear, that's fine. Look at the bottom. You know, if you see any what looks like water inside, pull it out, take a look, you know, shake it, see if there's any water. Considering how much money you spend on the fish, you obviously don't want to kill your fish either through electrocution or through overheating the tank. So, you know, in the best scenario, best case, you know, if you see your heater is failing, it's better to get rid of it. So with the replacement heater that I got there, that's actually still downstairs in a quarantine tank. So with that one too, I had taken it offline. There was nothing in the tank right now. There's snails and plants, and I didn't really need to heat it. I did later turn it back on because I've got some snails I'm going to add to this tank. I'm quarantining them down there in that tank, the quarantine tank in the basement for now. You know, once they're done, they're going to come in here. So I just wanted to keep the temperatures relatively similar. So the problem with that heater is the adjustment knob on the top. It was very tight to move. You know, it's been dry. It's been sitting out for a while. You know, so it was either where I adjusted it, it would just go to the bare minimum temperature, like 70 degrees. You know, which this case I keep this tank I keep heated up to here to about 77 degrees. You know, or if I cranked it the other way, it went straight up to 79. There was no in between. There was no fine tuning. So there's obviously something wrong with the mechanism in that heater. You know, the fact that I have to, you know, use two hands to adjust it, it takes a lot of effort. There's something wrong with it. So in that case, you know, the heater's not leaking, the heater's fine, but I'm still going to use that heater right now. Like I said, there's only snails in there, plants. It's sticking at 79. It's been 79 for consistently. So what I'm going to do is, and what I actually also have here is I have a controller, and what that controller does is you plug the heater into the controller, and you know, the controller itself has its own thermometer. You drop it there. It's got like a wired thermometer. You drop it in the tank, and with that, basically, if the temperature goes above a certain point, that controller shuts off the heater. So you don't have to worry about what the temperature of the heater is set at. The controller itself, you know, it knows, okay, you know, we hit 78 degrees, let's turn this off. So it shuts it off. So it's kind of a fail-safe basically. In case your heater does get stuck on for whatever reason, the controller is going to prevent it continuing to heat the tank until it kills everything in the aquarium. So I did buy another controller, like I said, a temperature controller. There are different ones. You need to purchase one specific for aquariums. There are other ones that work. They're more for like indoor gardening, indoor hydroponics. In this case, this is a Luxbird brand that I purchased off of Amazon. I believe it was around $20. You know, and this is a new. I haven't plugged it in yet. It's going to get plugged into that basement aquarium. I do have one right here. I will show you here in a second. It's called an Inkbird. So this is the Inkbird controller, like I mentioned. You can see right now it's set to control at about 78 degrees. And so right now the internal temperature is 78 degrees, and that's what the upper number is. And then the lower number is what the setting is supposed to be. So it's not supposed to go higher than 78, and it does, you know, it'll vary by a degree or two here because it takes a little time to turn off, and basically it takes a little time for the heat to dissipate. So in this case, you know, it's been working great. The heater's in the tank over there, right next to it, and it just sits over here in my aquarium, and you know, I periodically check it. Is the temperature within the parameters it's supposed to be? So actually there are now heaters too that have controllers built into the heater, so they will actually control the temperature. It's a separate on and off switch. They have a thermometer inside the heater itself that checks the temperature, and there's an external unit that you hang on the side of your tank, and that will show you, okay, you set your temperature here, and this will show you the internal temperature as well of the tank too. So that's another, similar to this type of device, but it's an all-in-one. They do cost a little more, obviously, because they're adding that extra feature. It's not something I've tested out yet. You know, as I mentioned some other videos, I'm working on a fish room. I will probably purchase, one or two of those heaters just to try out. Off the bat, I'm going to be heating my tanks individually. As I add on more tanks, then I might decide to heat the room. But as I'm heating tanks individually, I will try out those heaters just to see how, does it work? How well does it work compared to that? I mean, the nice thing about having a separate heater controller is, if the heater fails, the controller is still going to control the tank temperature and make sure it doesn't overcook. So depending on the quality of the heater that you buy, I mean, the controller, as long as the controller's there, it's working, it's fine, it's separate. If the heater fails, it's going to stick on, but the controller will make sure it doesn't cook the tank. Same type of thing too is you can get one of these controllers here, and that could fail. hopefully it doesn't fail to the point where it keeps the heater on. But that's also a risk. I mean, there's always these risks to any type of electrical equipment you get. There's a risk of failure, but at least you have two checks in here. If the heater fails, then the heater fails. But in this case, you also have the controller as well too. That hey, that's okay. The heater failed. It's stuck on, which we don't want. If the heater fails where it doesn't heat, that's a different story, not as bad. But if it gets stuck on, we don't want to cook the tank, the controller is going to shut it off. So when it comes to brand new heaters, you purchase a heater and then you need to get it ready for your aquarium. What I usually do is I will test these separate. I'll take a bucket, put it in my laundry room over there, fill it up with water, 5-6 gallons of water, whatever you can fill it up. Just drop the heater in there, plug it in, and just see if it warms it up. Give it, adjust the temperature, according to the settings on top there, drop it in, come back an hour or two later, check with your external thermometer. Did it warm it up? Is it within temperature? Is it getting too hot? It's not even working at all, then that gives you a hint right there whether the heater is working or not. So one important thing with aquarium heaters is you want to make sure they're always in water when they're plugged in. You never want to plug them in when they are not in water. Doing so could damage the heater. It could cause depending on the type of glass, the type of material that they use, the cheaper ones, likely you just use glass, that can shatter. It can destroy your heater. It can start a fire if it's not plugged in while in water. And especially when in water, if it's been plugged in for a while, it's been running, you need to take it out for whatever reason. Don't just take it out right away, unplug it. Give it about 30 to 60 minutes to cool off, then take it out. That way, if it's been running, it's hot, you're not taking it out and running the risk that it's going to suddenly cool down and cause some damage, shatter your glass, destroy your heater, basically. Another important thing to pay attention to is when you're doing water changes, if you're doing large water changes, you need to unplug the heater. Take it out of the outlet, same thing, let it cool down 20, 30 minutes, and then obviously don't forget to plug it back in, otherwise you'll have issues with cold fish that can kill many of your tropical fish. But the reason you want to unplug it when you're doing your water change, especially if it's a large water change. If the water level drops below the heater, it's going to stick on. So part of the heater might be underwater, part of the heater might be above water, and it might be reading too cold a temperature versus where the water is. It's going to keep heating. So then it will cook your fish in there with the part that's immersed in water. So the other part that's above water might crack, might get electrical leakage into your tank, which will be worse for you and your fish. Some aquarium heaters are equipped with a low level water sensor. Basically, when the water level gets too low, the heater knows that it will shut off automatically. So those are more your premium heaters. I wouldn't necessarily count on, even if a premium heater has that feature, I would not necessarily count on that. My best suggestion is just always unplug it before you do your water changes, and then don't forget to replug it after you've filled up your tank completely. If you did find this video helpful so far, please hit that like button so you can let me know that it's helpful to you, and feel free to share this with other people as well too who you think might benefit. So as I mentioned before, electricity and water do not mix. So you always need to be careful, especially with these heaters too. I will always inspect the cord, just check the cord, especially the parts that's going to go in the water, no cuts, no frays or anything like that. You also need to make sure that there's no electricity getting into the water too. It's hard to, there's a situation where it's just full electricity from this plug is getting into the tank. It's going to kill everything, unfortunately. So in that case, if you see that if something happens to your heater, whatever reason electricity leaks out, don't stick your hand in there. Unplug this first, and not only just the heater, unplug everything from your tank. I've got an internal filter in this one. I would unplug that. I would unplug my, just basically everything, the lights, whatever you have in there, just to make sure that there's something else is not causing that problem. And so then, then you obviously need to check all your equipment as well too to see, hey, where's that electricity leaking from if it's not the heater. Another thing with heaters is the heater placement, especially, especially at night when the fish kind of go into almost like a sleep state. They'll kind of float around and towards the bottom of the tank. Depending where your heater is placed, some fish do not know. They might come up against, lean up against the heater, especially when the heater kicks on, depending on the type of heater. If it's exposed like this one, there are other heaters that have like a kind of a casing, like some sort of plastic covering around it too, that kind of prevents the fish from getting direct contact to the heating element. But the fish do touch it there, they could get burned. Obviously burns on fish is going to, it could be lethal. It'll damage their slime coat, which basically is, gives them the protection in the water. So you need to be careful. There are, like I mentioned, there are certain heaters that have, a plastic covering on it that kind of prevents that. So, the water just flows across, gets heated. The fish don't come in direct contact with the heater. So when it comes to heating our aquariums, depending on the fish, generally we try and, most hobbyists try and stick with fish who are in similar locales, they either come from similar lakes, similar rivers or whatnot, and they all kind of live within the same temperature parameters. And so, in the wild, the temperatures fluctuate. I mean, you get, either it rains or you get some, but those bodies of water are so large that it doesn't fluctuate that much. So you might get a couple degrees here and there, up and down. And same thing with this. The heater is not an instant heat. It's not an instant cool. It takes time to warm it up. As that water passes by the heater, warms the rest of the tank up. So there is some fluctuation there. And you need to make sure your heaters are able to keep that temperature within that range. So if your fish range are, say, 72 to 76 degrees, it shouldn't fluctuate too much above or too much below that. That's why we also, when we purchase heaters, we make sure they're sized for the tank that we're getting. So for instance, 100-watt heaters are commonly used for, 20, 30-gallon tanks. If you get something too small, like a 50-watt heater, which is more typical for a 10-gallon tank, in that case, it's going to struggle too much to keep the larger tank heated. It's going to run on a lot more, and then the more it runs, then the more likely it's going to wear out over time. So you want to get properly sized heaters. I know in the cases of very large tanks, your 75, your 90s, your 125s and larger, sometimes people will buy 2 heaters, put one on each side. And that way, you might rather, you need a 300 watt for, say, a 125 gallon or, 300 to 400 watt heater. Rather than doing a 300 watt, you do 150 watts. That way, if one does get stuck on, it's not going to boil the tank. Or if one fails, there's at least still one heater in there that can still kind of keep things going until you get to replace the heater. So always check the manufacturer recommendations, see what they suggest. If they say 50 watts is great for a 10 gallon, 10 gallon up to 15 gallon, stick with that. And then, yeah, it definitely costs a little more, but we're protecting our hobby over here. We're protecting our aquarium inhabitants. Another safety tip when plugging in your heater, if everything else is fine, you plug it in and you set it up, is you want what they call a drip loop. So basically, here's the heater. It's going to go in the tank. You've got your wire right here. So you don't want the wire, the tank, it's in here, the tank's here. You don't want the wire going straight down into the outlet, and just hanging like this, straight down, almost like a, because if the water does flow out for whatever reason, water tends to stick to things like these and it'll flow. And if it flows into your electrical outlet, there's a chance that electricity can travel up that water into the tank, shock the inhabitants of the tank. It can cause a short circuit in your house, there's a potential risk of electrical fires. So rather than plugging it that way, you want a drip loop. And so basically what a drip loop is you have your heater here. Here's your little loop. You see this down loop here. Here's your plug here. So the plug goes in like this. So that way, if the water does drip down here, it's just going to go straight down to the floor versus, directly down like this. It's potential to go into outlet or your plug strip or whatever you have it. And so just have it go, have your drip loop there. And that way it goes straight to the floor in case the water does come out for whatever reason. So this is the heater that I mentioned earlier in the video that is stuck in 2 different positions. It's either low or high. Currently here it's set at 79 degrees. So I'm going to put in the controller, which will basically be plugged into the outlet, into my plug strip down there below, and then the heater will be plugged into that, and I'm going to drop the temperature down to 77 degrees. I'll do that, and then I will show the after results. So one thing I did not notice before, even when I bought this, is this actually has a port for 2 probes. So you can actually control 2 separate tanks separately. My other one, you can only do it on one tank. You only got 1 probe. This one actually comes with 2 probes. So this controller does have a maximum output of 500 watts, which means if you're plugging in 2 heaters, you're gonna need to make sure that the heater wattages do not exceed 500 watts. So if you got 2 different tanks, you've got a 100 watt heater in each, you're fine, you're at 200 watts total. If you have, say, one tank 300 watts, one tank 100 watts, you're at 400 watts. So long as you're not exceeding that 500 watt limit. I would recommend to stay below 500 watts regardless. So if you have a couple, two 200 heaters, I think you'd be fine. You're at 400 watts. Anything with electricity and overrunning the capabilities of a device, you run the risk that it'll cause an electrical fire. The probe is in. Temperature is reading 79 on the probe. Got this external thermometer here. It's reading 79.4. Plus or minus 0.4. Doesn't seem to be too much off. But so the upper limit I'm setting on this is 77.5. So it should, once it heats up to 77.5, it should turn off. And once it drops down to 76.5, it will turn on and heat. So I'll come back in a couple hours and check the temperature. Here we are a couple hours later. Both thermometers reading 77 degrees. 77 degrees here on the controller and 77 degrees on my external thermometer. So the controller is working great. So what are some other safety tips for aquarium water heaters that you know of? Please share them in the comments below, and please share any suggestions for future videos. You know, is there something else you want to see in relations to aquariums that I cover, or as well as the gardening that I cover? Please drop those in the comments below, and if you could please like and subscribe to the channel, I would appreciate it. Thank you, and see you in the next video.